Okay, we're going to talk about operating leverage here. So this is so we understand the concepts of cost structure. Now this talks about how we might design a cost structure of a given program or venture. Really, do we do it with more? It's the example I gave you before. Do we hire our own sales force and increase our fixed costs with lower variable costs, or do we outsource our force to dealers and brokers, lowering our fixed costs, raising our variable costs? So it's really one of the most important decisions that you'll make if you're doing business planning, or any kind of well, you'll see examples where it's very important. So this degree of fixed and variable costs all relate to this concept of operating leverage. So I just Investopedia. What is it? It's analysis of fixed and variable costs. The key thing is companies that have a high proportion of fixed operating costs. You're said to have leverage if you have a high proportion of fixed costs related to variable costs. And the reason is that if you have higher fixed costs relative to variable, you have lower variable costs, you have higher contribution margin. So as volume increases, your profit is going to increase faster, all other things being equal, right? So something like, Microsoft has super high operating leverage because the cost of their product on a variable cost basis is practically nothing, right? A copy of Excel, a student copy of Microsoft Office downloaded from the internet, doesn't cost Microsoft. What does that cost Microsoft to deliver a student copy of Microsoft Office? All their costs is fixed, right? And so, developers and software engineers, right? Now there's good and bad things here. So read this in detail. I'm not going to read this in detail. But somebody like Walmart, right? They're going to have less operating leverage because they're selling groceries and clothes and camping gear and all the other stuff it sells. They have to buy that. So if they sell, a package of meat or a tent or some clothes, they have to physically buy that, you know, stock it, and pay for that in order to sell it to you. So let's kind of simplify this. You're said to have operating leverage if a relatively small change in volume results in a large change in profit, relatively. So it translates into a cost structure with high physical fixed costs relative to variable. So here's the most important thing, and you'll be tested on it. Operating leverage is good if you think volume is going to grow and if you think the risk is low, right? So if you think volume is sky's the limit and it's not risky at all, you know what? Design your cost structure with a lot of fixed costs relative to variable costs, and you'll make more money. We'll talk about the flip side. So let's say a very typical example. My buddy who runs the urgent care company. Do you have Quest do your lab work? You outsource your lab work to Quest, at a high variable cost per test, or do you buy a machine and hire a tech, high fixed costs, and have a low variable cost? So let's say the high variable cost might be $55 for a lab test to pay for Quest. Maybe you charge $100 for the test. You're making money on it. Or you can lower that cost to $10, basically the supply. You buy a machine, $10,000. I'm making it up, and you hire a tech, all in at $50,000 a year. So let's just look at a graph of this. So operating leverage, I'm going to repeat this many times because it's the most important thing. It's great if you're very sure your volume you expect to grow. It's not so nice if volume is uncertain and shrinks. Okay, so let's look at this. Profit is the difference between the blue line and the two cost lines. Which cost line indicates a cost structure with operating leverage? Let's remember, a relatively small change in volume results in a large change in profit. Okay, the profit is higher with the red fixed cost line as volume increases. So let's do the comparison. Okay, and reasons why we might not want a lot of operating leverage. So revenue is our blue line. That doesn't change in either. Okay, so our red line is our high fixed cost operating leverage model. And you see the difference between the blue and the red line, how changes in volume, right, above the break even point really increase profit pretty well, right? Now let's say we did a high variable cost, low operating model. That's the dotted line. You see that the at high volume, the difference between the blue line and the dotted, that's profit, is smaller than the difference between the blue line and the red line. That's your high fixed cost model, right? So you're making less profit at high volume under a high variable cost, low operating leverage model than you are under a high fixed cost, high operating leverage model. But why might you say that's fine? I still don't want high fixed costs. Well, let's say you're uncertain about your volume. So let's look then. Here in this area, we're losing money, right, with the high fixed cost model. So our high fixed cost model, we start off with high fixed costs, we lose money here. We don't start making money until what, about 600 and let's just call it 625. We've lost money, and then we start to make money. With our high variable cost model, $55 per test, if we don't do much tests, we don't have any costs, right? If we do zero tests, we have zero costs. So in the high fix one, we have zero tests. We still have that $60,000 cost. So we lose money under the high operating leverage at low volume, but we still make it under the high variable costs. So that's where we say if your volume, you're sure about your volume and you're expected to grow, do the high fixed cost model. If you're not, if you're risk adverse, maybe you say, okay, I know I'm not going to make as much money potentially, but I'm not going to lose as much either at lower volumes. So here at at the high operating level, high operating mar, high operating leverage model at what about 625 we're broken even, but in the variable cost model we've made some money. Whatever, we've made some money. So we've made more money at lower volumes. So this is the takeaway, and you're going to be tested on it. In general, higher relative variable costs will minimize your downside risk, right? While tamping down your upside potential, and you clearly see that in the graph. You really can't lose any money because everything's variable costs, but you've tamped down your upside ability to make a lot of money. You've limited your leverage. If you're risk adverse, volume is uncertain, you consider a higher variable cost structure. If you're not risk adverse and or you're very confident in volume, consider the higher fixed cost structure with the more operating leverage. Now there's non-financial considerations as always. So a theme in this class is not everything is about spreadsheets and the numbers. You've got supply chain considerations. I'll give you two examples, operating leverage wise. So when during COVID, right, surgery centers, I'm involved with five, six surgery centers. State of Illinois said you have to have a COVID test 72 hours prior to surgery. So you can imagine it's the year 2020. Surgeries shut down for a few months. They're opening it up. All but emergent was shut down. Now the state says you have to test everybody. So we it was $700,000 for a machine, and then we had to hire lab techs, or we contracted it on paying Quest per test, and I can't remember what we paid. And some of it was reimbursable, some of it wasn't, or we could buy the equipment and we could bill. It really is neither here nor there. So our considerations, obviously financial at $700,000, but we also, okay, could Quest guarantee 70. We had to have turnaround time in less than 72 hours, right? We basically needed turnaround time in 72 minus 12 because we had to call the night patient. Usually you schedule, right? You get a call, late afternoon. Okay, we got you. Show up tomorrow at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. So our concern was, can Quest guarantee turnaround? And for the most part, well, I mean, we didn't buy our own machine. We didn't have $700,000, but we strongly considered it. I mean, we considered going in with a bunch of other surgery centers, different physician groups, and say, hey, let's. I mean, we literally were talking to a urology group, where we were orthopedics. We're talking about it. We were talking to a urology group about splitting the cost of a machine because we were worried about the turnaround time. But how long was this 72-hour, this testing requirement going to be in place? I mean, we buy the machine, and then, you know, 2 months later, the state of Illinois says, okay, you don't need to test anymore. It was just. I mean, I forget how long the it was in place. We could have made more money if the thing had lasted what 3 4 years and we had a lot of volume. but it was too much risk. It was too much risk. We didn't know, could we manage it. We didn't know how long the state was going to require it. So we just outsourced to Quest. So that was kind of a supply chain issue. So the point of this is to recognize a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about. It's just not always the numbers. Now I'll give you a kind of a more classic example that's kind of summarizes this, and this is kind of an interesting one because it's actually real. So you're going to learn about value based care in a few lectures. So it's a bundle payment program. In summary, Medicare set a target price for a joint replacement. Let's call it $30,000. If our surgeons manage the cost of care for less than that, CMS gave us a check less 2% for the difference. So it was a Obama administration thing to try to, you know, get physicians to rethink how care is delivered and what's really necessary and what isn't. So super hot topic among orthopedic groups. So Don's a buddy of mine. He ran a competing group. We're all kind of friendly competition. He hired three case managers at $100,000 a year, plus office space, computers, and everything else. So Don went with the high operating leverage model, the high fixed costs. Me, I'm like, I don't know. There's just too much uncertainty. I'm a CPA. I'm risk averse by nature. Do I real? I come from disease management. I had a background in it. Hiring, getting office space, getting computers, having to manage. No, I mean nothing against case management nurses, but just having to manage three other people. And what was the volume going to be? So I outsourced it to a case management company who charged me $305 a visit, or not visit, sorry, $305 a case to case manage the patients. And the case management was, tracking the patients, follow up, making sure that the hospital was discharging them to the physician's desired, you know, place of care, home versus skilled nursing versus inpatient. You'll learn about that in a few lectures. So I hired them. I just said, look, I don't know what our volume's going to be. I don't know if the physicians are going to embrace the program. I don't know, Obama, whatever. He's right. He's term limited. Somebody else wins the election, either Democrat or Republican at the time. Maybe they don't like the program. So who knows what the longevity of it. I don't like, what if the volume was low and I had these nurses there and they had nothing to do, and I don't mean to value judge it, but twiddle their thumbs at, because the volume's low and I've got other employees. Well, they're not, they just sit on their phones all day. Again, I'm not value judging. It's a function of volume. And so I outsourced. And I tell you, I caught a tremendous amount of grief from the physician president of the group. All he saw was the bills for $305 a case, and yelling at me about, the bills for $305 a case. And of course, he knows Don and his doctors, and they're not paying $300 a case, but they're paying for three people. So a couple years into this, I got tired of of listening to this physician complain. You know, I not not patient to explain my lecture on operating leverage. So I said, you know what? Don and I are going to figure out. We're going to take his costs and our costs and figure out his total cost divided by the number of cases against our $305 a case. And so Don was game, and we did the math, and it's not a shot at Don. He did a very traditional approach. Don's costs averaged $800 a case. So when he took the cost of the rent and the computers and the nurses and their benefits, and he divided by the number of cases, his came out to $800 a case. Mine was 305. I don't think the physician. I was like Wayne in Wayne's World when he had the $5,000 check. I was so happy. Or my Fender guitar. I was like, ah ha ha. I don't think the physician quite believed me, but the math was the math. So again, it isn't that I was smarter than Don or not. It just shows you that my thought process was volume was uncertain, longevity was uncertain. I didn't want any personnel issues. And then Don just took a. I'll tell you of. I made presentations on this, and I will tell you that out of 100 orthopedic groups around the country, 95% of them hired case management nurses, and very few of us just outsourced it. And now, when we eventually merged with another group, we wound up hiring the nurses. But this was like 4 years into the program when the uncertainty was less, when we knew what we were doing, when the volume was certain, when we had more physicians. So it's not necessarily either or, right? We transitioned from an outsourced model, high variable cost, to an operating leverage model. But again, it was all about uncertainty and volume. Once we'd gotten experience with the program, had certain volumes, all the physicians embraced it, then it made sense to hire the nurses. So it's really kind of a classic good example of operating leverage. But what you need to understand is this. I'm not going to do mathematical tests for the homework on operating leverage, but you should understand the concept. It's very important as you can see, COVID, what do we do? A new program, something different. The previous example, do we hire our sales force? Do we outsource them? It's really a very important topic that almost could be its own, multi-chapter discussion.